everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, we are now in the season. It's crazy. It seems like almost as if we just did the bowl game wrap-up, and here we are in the 2019 season, and it's underway, and Ohio State is 1-0, and the best thing about that is the opportunity to go 2-0, as you are well aware. And the Buckeyes come out on top. Florida Atlantic, of course, we both thought that would be a comfortable win. It was, a comfortable win. And the narrative has already begun, as I heard Chris Fowler say Saturday night, that Ohio State was very unconvincing in their victory over Florida Atlantic. So, plant those seeds early, ESPN, ABC. Let's get those two SEC teams in no matter what. But Chip, the thing that stuck out to me is that for the first quarter of the first game of the season, this looked like a juggernaut team. And even though Florida Atlantic made some adjustments and Ohio State kind of, lost some of that early momentum with that turnover, especially with the turnover late in the first half, it never was any kind of worry. I mean, Ohio State stayed very vanilla, very basic throughout the day, and never really allowed Florida Atlantic to get back in the game.
Well, I think it was John Cooper who used to say, win the easiest way or something along those lines. And you're precisely right. I think the game was never in question, especially after, the juggernaut that was unleashed on Florida Atlantic within the first quarter. 28-0. I started thinking, where's the, kind of like from Rocky IV, throw the towel, kind of thing, like when Apollo Creed was being pummeled by Ivan Drago. But
throw the damn towel.
Yeah, exactly. So, as you said, Ohio State, I kind of look at it as though, we both have been fans of this team as well as college football for a number of years, and anyone will tell you that the first game you're going to have a lot of just kind of inconsistencies throughout. And I think Ohio State fans saw it. I have every confidence that the coaching staff saw it. Credit to the coaching staff that they never seemed to get panicked or show any kind of conflict that the Buckeyes were ever in danger, as you said. So very happy with the win. Obviously a lot of room for improvement across the board, but as you said at the onset of the podcast, the fact that they are now 1-0 with the opportunity to go 2-0 is precisely where we want to be heading into the second week of the season.
Mm-hmm. So the Buckeyes win on opening day, 45-21, and it really looked like Ohio State was going to, put like an 80-point win on the board the way things started out. Justin Fields went 51 yards for a touchdown. On his what may have been his first carry. I'm not sure if it was his first or second, but it was a very early carry for him, going 51 yards. And it was nice to see the return of the long touchdown run, even though we didn't get one from a running back. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. The Buckeyes came out, and the very first pass of the game was to a tight end. And so you're like, okay, well, there's our tight end pass for the day. But no, it was a day of tight end passes, as Jeremy Ruckert alone scored 2 touchdowns and had a big day for him. And Ruckert scored the second touchdown for Ohio State, made it 14-0. Benjamin Victor with a long pass reception. Chris Olave with a long pass reception. It was 28-0. After the first quarter, Ohio State finally stopped on the fifth drive, and then that kind of set off a little bit of lethargy in the offense, where they went several drives without scoring, and a couple of those without a first down. And it was nothing. It was never a problem, because the defense, as well as the offense was playing, the defense was playing just as well, if not better.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the tight end being a prominent part of the offense. I want to give credit to Ryan Day and the offensive coaching staff. I think Gerd and Tom Orr, they might have had a photo on the Ozones of Kevin Wilson, who is the tight end coach and kind of co-offensive coordinator, that kind of almost like a sly grin across the face of Kevin Wilson pregame that kind of, I know something that you don't know, kind of foreshadowing the role that the tight end was going to play in this game and probably throughout the season, depending on the opponent. You mentioned Jeremy Ruckert. He was cited during the game as being arguably like the best tight end prospect that Urban Meyer had ever seen when he recruited him. Mm-hmm. He is kind of a physical mismatch in the fact that, when he played in high school in New York, he was more or less, kind of, like he was lined up as a tight end, but let's face it, he was more of a wide receiver, in his high school role. So he's still kind of that, like he's not the devastating blocker that most Ohio State fans typically associate with the tight end position. And I'm not saying that he can't block. He's just not. That's not really the strength of his game. Mm-hmm. But I saw at some points, Ohio State coming out with 3 tight ends. They had not only Jeremy Ruckert in the game, they also had Luke Farrell as well as Jake Hausman. Where they would kind of utilize Farrell and Hausman as more of blockers. And I think the last you mentioned Jeremy Ruckert receiving 2 touchdowns. The second touchdown near the goal line, and I know we're not there yet, but just to kind of foreshadow it, is they actually had Luke Farrell, basically, well, maybe it was the first one now that I think about it. I think Luke Farrell actually kind of cleared out, which opened up for Jeremy Ruckert to be so wide open on that touchdown. So credit to Ryan Day and the coaching staff for using the talent on the roster that they have. And, instead of being so committed to a specific scheme, that they recognize what they have and using it well. And I can't say enough about the defense in terms of, especially in their first half performance. I mean, like they limited Florida Atlantic on the whole game. I know that sacks are included, and I know that a lot of people get really up in arms about the fact that sacks shouldn't be included in terms of the rushing total and all that. But they limited Florida Atlantic on the game, I think, to 22 yards rushing or something along those lines. I mean, like in the first half, I think Florida Atlantic, weren't they like negative 73 yards offense? I mean, it was a complete departure from what we saw last year. The elimination of the big plays by the defense was a welcome sight for this Ohio State fan. So I know that we're going to continue talking about the defense. There are certain players that I want to give credit to, but it was certainly very, very impressive start. And I'm sure we can continue talking about some of the things that were concerning for the remaining 3 quarters.
Yep. So the Buckeyes go into the second quarter. The offense kind of stalls a bit. I think a lot of self-inflicted wounds. There were some dropped passes in that second quarter, including a long one that was made under extreme duress that hit off the hands of Chris Olave, I believe it was, and that could have been a big play in another scoring drive. And the Buckeyes didn't score in that second quarter, and they eventually looked to be in good shape in driving, and there was just a total meltdown on a pass that was supposed to be a forward pass. Justin Fields threw it basically even with the down to the sideline from where he was standing. So that was ruled a lateral on the field. The whistle didn't blow. It was a little disappointing to see Jeremy Ruckert, the closest man to the ball, give up on the play without a whistle and give FAU that turnover. And then of course there was the turnover by J.K. Dobbins as well, a fumble, as it was weird because Ohio State kind of got real conservative and didn't really want to run the 2-minute drill, and they went with J.K. 3 straight plays, and Dobbins fumbled, and to their defense's credit, they held firm and didn't give up any yards really, and forced FAU to settle for a Vladimir Rivas 28-yard field goal, and it's 28-3 at the half.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Florida Atlantic, we were coming into as fans. I mean, let's face it. Last week on the podcast, we were kind of speculating. All right, well, we believe Chris Robeson is going to be the starting quarterback. We believe that these are the players to look out for, and we were somewhat accurate in the sense that the main target as related to when it came to Florida Atlantic was for Florida Atlantic was tight end Harrison Bryant. I mean, you could see throughout the game, Florida Atlantic was desperately trying to get him involved as much as possible. And credit to Brendan White. I mean, he kind of showed why he was immediately anointed as that bullet position, even though, as Gerd said, he kind of felt lied to. The fact that it was just okay. It was basically, it's like, okay, no, it's just a strong safety. It's like, after all the hype and hoopla around the bullet position, it just seemed like it's really more of just like we're playing more like a 4-2-5, and it's kind of, this guy is more of a strong safety. But yeah, to go in 28-3 after the way that they started out 28-0, I mean, like gangbusters, it was kind of deflating.
Mm-hmm. Now, the thing about Florida Atlantic is that this is a team, Chip, that put up almost 500 yards of offense a game last year, 478.8 yards a game, and returned their quarterback, returned a guy who looks like there's no question he's going to play in the NFL in Harrison Bryant. And Ohio State's defense handled it. I mean, we thought they might give up some plays here and there. Lane Kiffin would get some scheme advantages, and they would catch Ohio State in the wrong defense or catch a mismatch somewhere, and by using tempo, which they did try to do that a few times, and I think they were successful in the second half with it a couple of times. But everything seemed to work for the defense. These running plays were not getting anywhere. They were, there wasn't any of this getting 5 yards downfield before there's contact kind of thing. It was really, for a while, Florida Atlantic on a running play was lucky if they didn't lose yardage. Yeah,
and that let's give credit to the Ohio State reconstituted defensive line, because there were players that Ohio State had to do without. Along the interior, Jayshon Cornell, who was supposed to be the defensive tackle, they had to move him to defensive end, because of the fact that they didn't have, a full complement of defensive linemen at that position. So, as you said, it was Florida Atlantic was doing anything and everything they could to just kind of gain positive yardage. Most of the time, they were failing at that. Mm-hmm. So, I think one game does not a season make, I should say, but I certainly feel a heck of a lot more comfortable with Ohio State's defense than I did a year ago at this time after Ohio State beat Oregon State.
Right. Now, Chase Young was a beast in this first half especially. He was officially credited with a sack and a half, but I think there were a couple of other opportunities where there was a sack, and the fact that Chase Young didn't get a sack or a half sack on it was only related to the fact that Chase Young was tackling his teammate who was tackling the quarterback at the time.
Yeah, let's be upfront about this. Chase Young is already being whispered as a potential number one overall selection in the 2020 NFL draft, and if that does come to pass, it wouldn't be surprising to see some of those highlights of his performance against Florida Atlantic in those cut-up reels that the NFL likes to do with players as they're being selected. So he's going to be, let's just say he's going to start getting the Bosa treatment. And I mean that with all respect to both Joey and Nick Bosa, in the sense that they were quite often double-teamed, triple-teamed by the opposition, which only means that already well-respected Ohio State defensive line the opportunity for some of those other teammates like Robert Landers, who I think was credited with a half sack, Jayshon Cornell, who I mentioned earlier, that they're going to get their opportunities to shine defensively, pressuring the opposing quarterbacks in coming games.
Mm-hmm. Jayshon Cornell looked fast. He looked like he looked so much faster than he's ever looked, and I think you could almost go right across the board and say that about almost the entire defense. The defense played extremely fast on Saturday, and I didn't see any complaints in my timeline about Pete Werner or Tuff Borland, so that was nice. And even I didn't really even see any about some of the favorite punching bags in the secondary either. So it was a good performance overall. We go into the third quarter. 28-3, Florida Atlantic adds a field goal in the third quarter to make it 28-6 at that point. Ohio State finally gets things going again later in that third quarter. Jeremy Ruckert gets his second touchdown reception. He slipped free of coverage as Fields ran around a little bit, found him wide open, and delivered the ball, made it 35-6 at that point. FAU did come back down and score a touchdown, and actually a rushing touchdown. So Larry McCammon getting in, and then they got the 2-point conversion on that, which was really a dangerous throw by Robeson. But I mean, what are you going to do? It's a 2-point conversion. You may as well wing it up there. But he was running for his life to the short side and giving ground. It just seemed like a matter of time before he got sacked, and he threw one back across his body, and it was just somebody had slipped free of John Mitchell and left him standing all by himself, and he gets the 2-point conversion. So FAU is feeling their oats a little bit now at 35-14. But still a 3-touchdown deficit to make up, and Ohio State immediately answered with a touchdown drive. J.K. Dobbins flying through the air with the greatest of ease for a 1-yard touchdown run to make it 42-14. And FAU tacked on a short touchdown pass to John Rain from Chris Robeson, and then OSU finished off with a Blake Hobbill 46-yard field goal. So 45-21 is your final. And a team that's, basically was top 15 in the country in total offense last year, only netted 228 yards, and a lot of that was in garbage time against some backups. And it seemed to me the Buckeyes rotated backups in on the defense earlier than on offense, with the exception of the offensive line. I think the offensive line backups got in here and there in the first half.
Well, you mentioned something about not seeing a lot of complaints about Pete Werner and Tuff Borland, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I want to single out, because I did on the Buckeye Leaves segment that Gerd ran the other day on the Ozone, and that's to Baron Browning. And perhaps I'm kind of a lone voice in the wilderness here, but Baron Browning was heavily recruited, one of the top 10 players in the country when he came out. And in my estimation, this was probably the best performance that I saw of Baron Browning, without a doubt, since he has arrived in Columbus. I know that he came in with all these high accolades, and quite commonly, the high school hype does not necessarily translate to the college field. But maybe it was just one game. But it certainly seemed to me that Baron Browning represented himself extremely well against Florida Atlantic, that he was actually playing without overthinking, that he was just, his athleticism was on display throughout the game. Getting back to the idea that Ohio State was able to, if not completely eliminate, substantially slow down a well-respected offense in Florida Atlantic. I think, like you said, they were liberally substituting throughout the game, which is a good thing. I mean, I'm always going to be a strong advocate of rotating players in to get as much game experience as possible. So I think that contributed to the final score, as well as the total offensive yards that Florida Atlantic accumulated. But I left that game feeling like, okay, like there are certainly some things to work on offensively and defensively, but by and large, this team looks, well positioned to have a very successful 2019 season.
Yeah, they got FAU. The Owls got 206 yards passing on 40 attempts, though, and it was they were flirting with disaster a few times. There were a few near interceptions in the first half, and then of course Josh Proctor got one late in the game. You mentioned Baron Browning, and I thought he was, again, one of those guys who seemed faster than he did last year. And I just think that's a product of what we've talked about and what has been talked about on the Ozone all through camp, and that is that they've simplified the defense so the defense can just go get the ball. They can make quick decisions, flow to the ball, use their athleticism, and I think we saw a lot of that on Saturday. It was we talked about Chase Young a little bit already. He had 3 solos, 2 assists, 1.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for loss. He had a pass breakup. It was a key pass breakup because he got his arm up and knocked down a pass that would have been completed out in the flat, and that would have probably been at least about a 7-8 yard gain, and maybe more if there was a missed tackle. So, nice day for Chase Young. He was chasing, living up to his name, chasing things down from behind, and they talked about him on the broadcast as having gained some weight, and I swear his biceps look so much bigger this year. I think most of the weight gain was in his biceps.
Yeah, I was at Friday Night Lights several years ago when that was still a thing, and when Chase Young gave his verbal commitment to Ohio State. And I remember how excited Larry Johnson and Urban Meyer were on the sidelines, just from a distance, and knowing that, okay, a verbal commitment just came in. And when you look at Chase Young, I mean, as you said, we've been around long enough to remember, some other physically, imposing defensive end, just from the sight of them, like we've talked about Alonzo Spellman, right? In terms of like, you just referenced Chase Young's biceps and how much stronger, but, he's certainly primed for a big year. If anything, I just hope that Ohio State fans recognize the fact that, Florida Atlantic, they were kind of coming into this from a position of weakness, and, some of the other teams on Ohio State's schedule are certainly going to do anything and everything they can to neutralize or eliminate Chase Young from being as dominant as he appeared on Saturday.
Yeah. So, Chip, you had 42-14, very close. The final score was 45-21, so you're 3 points off on the Buckeyes and 7 points off on the visiting FAU Owls. I had 48-20, which is 3 points off for the Buckeyes and 1 point off for the Owls, and that was because they didn't kick an extra point. They went for 2 and got it. If they kicked the extra point, I'd have had them dead to rights because I just kind of saw it as a 2-touchdown, 2-field-goal kind of opponent, and that's what they got. So I think we were both pretty close there.
I think we were. Now, if we were on The Price is Right, would I win the year's supply of rice-a-roni, or would you? I can't remember how that – isn't it like if you underbid or something like – I mean, it doesn't really matter. I think we were both, as you said, giving credit to you and giving credit to me. I mean, we were both in the same ballpark. I think by and large, the reason why people kind of felt somewhat kind of disappointed was, I mean, when they got off to that blazing start, I mean, when you're looking at 28-0 at the end of the first quarter – you're thinking, good God, this is going to be, like a 70-something to, nothing kind of route. Mm-hmm. And for it to wind up the way it did, I think people were just kind of wanting more. But I also believe, as you said, there were some things that Ohio State needs to address, in terms of, all across the board. But I certainly have no complaints about, I mean, if I had to hone in on the positive, is that I think the possibility of Ohio State giving up big plays defensively, not trying to rush into this, but I think the big plays defensively, I don't think Ohio State fans have anything to worry about this coming season. I think they've really addressed that, and they're well positioned to be a factor in the Big Ten as it gets closer and closer to conference play.
Yeah, it was a nice day. I think, I'm looking at the longest play. The longest rushing play was 9 yards for Florida Atlantic. Longest pass play was 38. So there was one, I think only one play all day over 20 yards. So
there you go.
The defense did a nice job of handling that. And of course, some of that you got to look at the opponent, and it's kind of hard to say how good FAU is in terms of where they are, because we won't know until they start playing other teams in their league and at their level to see if they're one of the better teams at their level or not a very good team at their level. I was pleased with the defensive effort. I thought the defensive play was good. I don't think that Ohio State did a lot of things that were fancy in the stunting and blitzing and that kind of thing. I think that they stayed pretty basic to because they could. They didn't need to do anything fancy. And once FAU started to adjust to the basics that Ohio State was presenting, they were able to move the ball a little bit better. And they had to convert, I think, a lot of third downs to be able to keep some of those drives alive. But I don't anticipate that being the issue later in the season. I figure, that's when Greg Madison and those defensive coaches can dial up any number of different things and different looks and get a little bit more complex. And I don't think that FAU moving the ball in the second half is a big concern to me because Lane Kiffin's, for what he is, and a lot of people joke about him, he's a pretty good offensive-minded coach. And so if he goes in and says, yeah, okay, this is what the defense is doing, here's how we can combat that, and he still can only put a couple scores on the board, I think you're doing a pretty good job.
Precisely. And let's face it, I'd rather Ohio State start out simple, as you said, defensively, that I think, there wasn't a lot of blitzing. There wasn't a lot of stunting. There wasn't a lot of things that they put on film for Cincinnati or any other opponent to really see, this is what they like to do in this kind of down and distance situation. So I'd rather win, as we said at the onset, as Coach Cooper used to say, win the simplest way, win the easiest way. If that means kind of a very basic defensive scheme that wasn't really too complicated, who cares? I mean, as you said, they only gave up a few scores, and the game was never in doubt.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at some individual statistics. J.K. Dobbins was both of our picks to click on the offensive side because we both figured he'd get a lot of carries. He got 21 carries for 91 yards net. He had a 1-yard loss and 92 yards gained, so only one negative play for J.K., and of course he did have the fumble. I would say he had one touchdown as well. I would say that we had him as a pick to click, and 21 carries for 91 yards. To me, for an Ohio State running back, is not that impressive, so I would say we missed on our pick to click.
I agree with you. I think J.K., I don't know if it's that he's trying to make big plays and not just let the game come to him. It doesn't seem as though he is just, I don't know. I'm stammering to articulate it, but as you said, he had the 91 yards, he had the touchdown, obviously he had the fumble, which is regrettable, but that happens to the best of players. It was kind of, it wasn't as though he was, in terms of ball security was, switching the ball or something, from one arm to the next and fumbled. It was kind of a, a clean shot that jarred the ball loose. Mm-hmm. But I certainly would hope that there would be better production from him going forward. And I anticipate this coming week against Cincinnati, it's going to be, I'll be surprised if he has as good of a game against Cincinnati as he did against Florida Atlantic, because I certainly envision Luke Fickell and Marcus Freeman keying in on him. I know we're not at that point about the Cincinnati game, but I just think he's going to be a marked man by the opposing defenses going forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably I think Saturday was not necessarily on JK. I thought that he ran hard. I think that everybody remembers the stiff arm in the open field where he just kind of threw the FAU player away from him. His longest run was 17 yards, so he's still not where he needs to be. He needs to be breaking a 20-plus yard run, not every down, obviously. That's kind of crazy to think that should happen, but once or twice a game you would expect that he'd have a long run. But Dobbins, I think, was hampered a little bit in the fact that FAU seemed pretty certain early on that Justin Fields wasn't going to be running the ball a lot. And he ended up with 12 carries, but some of those carries were not designed carries. They were scrambling around and, seeing what he could get out of a play. He ended up with 61 yards rushing, but he had 23 yards in losses to go with 84 yards in gains, and of course 51 of that was on one play. So I think that Justin Fields, to me, it looked like they were running zone read plays, but without the actual option. Like they had predetermined where the ball was going to be, and I think that was just because they knew, A, they don't want to get Justin Fields hit a lot, and B, they don't really have to run those options against FAU. They'll just pick one and go with it, and just try not to make mistakes. That's what it looked like, because there were at least 4 or 5 plays that stick out to me where it's like, okay, if he would have done this, that could have been a touchdown. Or if he would have, in this particular instance, he should have given, and he kept. And I think they only ran Fields just enough to try to keep the defense honest. But I think that may have played into why Dobbins didn't have a bigger day, because the offensive line, they were seeing some stunts. They were seeing, if you watch the replay of the game, I watched it again last night late, maybe it was Saturday night late maybe, and it looked instantly like FAU was attacking with everything they had. After the first series, it looked like, okay, if there even looks like it's going to be a handoff, everybody's going after J.K. Dobbins, and it really gummed up the line of scrimmage. Now Cincinnati's going to try doing that stuff, but I think Ohio State's going to try to use that to their advantage if they do.
Well, my compliments to you if you watched it again Saturday night, because there were a lot of other great games that were going on Saturday. So
it may have been Sunday night. It's kind of been a blur. These long weekends are kind of a blur to me.
Okay, I understand. But yeah, I completely agree. I think the opposing defenses they're going to sell out on the run against J.K. Dobbins, which means that the Ohio State offensive coaching staff has to do something to kind of, Justin Fields, I agree with something that I read online, that it seemed as though Justin Fields was waiting for the exact moment when he felt comfortable throwing the ball. Okay, if they were completely wide open, then he would throw it. And you and I both know that's not going to be the case as the season progresses. You're just going to be facing better defensive teams, starting this weekend, as a matter of fact, but where you're not going to have that luxury of, kind of taking your time and making sure, this guy is completely wide open and I can throw it. It's going to be more and more of a challenge. So I think hopefully getting some more decisiveness from Justin Fields was part of what the coaches anticipated. And by that measure, I think that, when it comes to, Justin Fields, I also saw, I'm sure that you did as well, a lot of people were kind of wondering, okay, well, when are they going to put in Chris Chuganoff or Gunnar Hoke, to get them some reps? And, we talked about that, and it's been a concern of mine. It still is, going into week 2, is that, all right, Justin Fields, and he had let's not forget the fact that, he did throw 4 touchdown passes and run one, for himself, and completed 72% of his passes. And he had as strong of a debut as you could possibly want. But let's not forget the fact that, he's still relatively inexperienced. And yeah, they did have a commanding lead, and yes, Chris Chuganoff did get in the game late, but it's going to be one of these balancing acts, like on a high wire, if you will, for the offensive coaches of, all right, well, we don't want to run him too much because we might get him hurt, and we want to get him reps, but we, don't want to ignore the fact that we have 2 unproven backups behind him and all these kind of things. It's going to be kind of a, it's just going to be kind of a wait and see, I think, approach offensively especially I'm willing to say for like the first several games of the season, until the Ohio State coaches can really figure out what they have. This game against Florida Atlantic was just what the doctor ordered, because I think that the Cincinnati game is certainly going to be, in my estimation, going to be a character building game for the Buckeyes as they get closer and closer to Big Ten play.
Yeah. So what I saw here from Justin Fields, 18 of 25, no interceptions, 234 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was sacked twice, and really one of those was he had every opportunity to throw the ball away, and he was just trying to hold down on till the last second to try to make a play. And sometimes you have that with your more athletic quarterbacks. They're so used to just extending the play, and sometimes discretion is not the better part of valor for them, and they end up holding it just a second too long and end up taking a sack they don't need to take. But Fields, you're right. He hit like his first 6 or 7 passes in a row, and it was the drop by KJ Hill, which was very uncharacteristic, which was the first incomplete pass. He also had at least 2 other drops. There was one by Olave that I talked about earlier, and there was one by I think it was Luke Farrell, and then maybe another one that you could almost classify as a drop. So I mean, his day was very good from an accuracy standpoint. He did kind of tend to survey the field and look for somebody breaking completely free, and I don't know how much of that is just, maybe his instructions before the game, don't put the ball in jeopardy, just kind of go out there,
right,
take what they give you kind of thing, and maybe later in the season when he's more comfortable and Ryan Day's coached him up a little more and he's got some film to look at, maybe then we'll see him throwing guys open or throwing to guys who are not out of their break yet and that kind of thing. So, but you certainly can't argue with the arm strength. His accuracy was good. He didn't put the ball in harm's way. He's going to have a much different night against Cincinnati in terms of the pressure that he's seeing. Of course, I thought that Ohio State did some poor protection of him, and some of it was on him for not recognizing it. But FAU brought a variety of blitzes after it got to 28-0, and they said, we're getting killed running what we're running, so we may as well just attack from everywhere. And it was a good move from FAU because it really took Ohio State by surprise. But the great thing about that is you get the win and you get all of that on tape, and then you get to go break down the film with the players and say, this is what we're going to see next week, and when they do this, you do this.
Right, and let's also give credit to. I know, as you said, that some of those sacks, like especially the one, it appeared as though, Justin Fields, I mean, it was that he was being overly cautious and he could have thrown the ball away rather than take the sack. Mm-hmm. I want to give credit to the Ohio State offensive line. The mere fact that he did have, now granted, it might have been some of the poor defensive schemes that Florida Atlantic was running, but he did have ample time most of the game, and we were talking about the offensive line being a huge, I know for me it was a huge question mark heading into this season. You're talking about 4 of 5 new starters, and Josh Myers had a great game. When it came to I saw that Thayer Munford, who is the starting left tackle, but the coaching staff liberally substituted in Josh Alabi, to make sure that, if you want to think of it as Munford being on a pitch count.
It did seem like Alabi had a lot of snaps. I was trying to pay attention to see who was in, and of course, usually the tackles are the ones you can see the easiest. So it did seem like he was in more often.
Yeah, and then you had newcomer like Jonah Jackson playing. You had Wyatt Davis. I mean, granted, he started before, but he's one of those guys that he doesn't have a ton of experience. Everyone was like everyone's feel good story of last week, justifiably so. Brandon Bowen starting at right tackle. He played. And then from what I understand, not that he played substantially, but a true freshman, Harry Miller, who we've talked about. He got in a few snaps late in the game. So the point is, I think the offensive line, the coaches looked at this as an opportunity to play as many games on both sides of the ball, offensively, defensively. We talked about rotating players. They recognize the fact that they've got a lot of guys that have minimal game experience, and it's not just at the quarterback position. They're trying to, when they can, get players in and get them meaningful snaps because they know that these guys may be needed throughout the course of the season.
Mm-hmm. So just to finish up, Dobbins, of course, 91 yards rushing, Fields 61, each of them had a touchdown. Master Teague got in and ran 8 times for 49 yards, and he had 6.1 yards a carry. It was very nice to see that. Marcus Crowley, 4 carries for 27 yards. He had the best per rush average at 6.8. And then Demario McCall had a couple of carries for 11 yards. It was interesting to see that when they did give to Demario, it was right up the middle.
That is interesting. And I also believe that is more indicative of the opposition versus what they will do throughout the course of the season. And I'm not trying to downplay Demario McCall. I had the pleasure of seeing him perform for North Ridgeville High School because that's relatively close to where I live. I actually watched him run for 300 plus yards and 5 touchdowns against my nephew's high school. I mean, and this was, prior to McCall giving his verbal commitment to Ohio State. So I certainly think he has a role to play within this offense, but I don't know. I'm just going to use the analogy here is that, being an Ohio boy, and I know that I'm talking to somebody who, this is probably just like a faint and fond, distant memory, like the idea of plowing snow. It's like, by and large, like if I'm going to be plowing snow, I'm going to probably have like something more of, kind of like like I'm going to probably put a plow on the front of like a truck or a 4x4. I'm not going to put it on the front of like a sports car. And, like I don't look at Demario McCall as kind of being the plowing type. I look at him more as as the sports car. I could see Master Teague. Master Teague impressed me considering he had battled some nagging injuries throughout the fall camp, as well as Marcus Crowley. I think those interior runs, they're better suited and better designed for that, but they also probably don't want to, tip their hand when it comes to Demario McCall when he comes in. Like, oh, okay, well, he's going to be, just going out of the backfield or a perimeter, running play. I mean, they're probably trying to mix it up. But I think that was more indicative of what they saw on Florida Atlantic's defensive personnel, that they felt that they could get some positive yardage with McCall in the interior.
And the other thing it does is it makes Cincinnati have to prepare for an interior run for Demario McCall.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that too. So it was good to see a variety of things. Also, the running backs were not used as much in the passing game as I expected, so that might be something that the team is holding back a little bit on. We look at the receiving. Chris Olave had the most catches, the most yards, 5 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. Jeremy Ruckert was right behind him, 4 catches, 38 yards, 2 touchdowns. KJ Hill caught 3 for 21. Ben Victor had 2 for 65 and a long touchdown. Austin Mack 2 for 21. J.K. Dobbins and Demario McCall each caught 1. And Jalen Gill had 1 catch for -2 yards from, I think that was Chug's only completion. He was 1 for 1. But a good day. I'd say on the offensive side of the ball, I think if you and I are going to do the pick to click all season, I think Justin Fields would have been a successful pick to click individual. I think Chris Olave and Jeremy Ruckert also would have fallen into that category.
And I'm going to throw my guy Baron Browning in that, like to pick to click. I mean, that would have been the complete.
Well, I'm just talking about the offense here. I'm just talking about offense.
Just the offense. Okay, then I stand corrected. You're absolutely right. Like Jeremy Ruckert, certainly nobody could have anticipated. I mean, when we're talking strictly about the offense, I think nobody could have anticipated, oh, by the way, Jeremy Ruckert's going to catch 4 passes and 2 of them are going to be for touchdowns. If we had said that a week ago, I mean, I'm sure, like our podcast fans would have been taking us to the nearest, blackjack table in Vegas or something else. Like, like how could you guys have been that wise? But yeah, you're right. I think offensively, everyone you mentioned certainly would have been popular, pick to click options.
All right, so defensively, you picked Jordan Fuller you picked Brendan White, and I picked Malik Harrison as our pick to click. Jordan Fuller led all tacklers, 4 solo, 3 assists, and I think that I can successfully say Malik Harrison did click. He was at 4 total tackles, 3 solo, 2 assists. He had a sack for 13 yards. He had 2 tackles for 15 yards worth of losses, so I think Malik Harrison is a successful pick to click. Brendan White with 2 solo tackles, 1 assist, and 1 tackle for loss, 2 yards. He had a pass breakup as well. Maybe borderline, but I don't think overall the secondary was that tested.
No, they weren't. I mean, Brendan White, he showed up earlier than throughout. Like I seem to recall when I watched it. I mean, it seemed as though he was definitely making his mark on Harrison Bryant earlier. And then perhaps it was just simply because he was substituted for Jocelyn Wint that Harrison Bryant seemed to have more success. But yeah, I would say that, by and large, Brendan White had a good game, but nothing dominant. Mm-hmm. I certainly have no complaints about, as I said earlier, I have no complaints about the performance of the defense.
Mm-hmm. Picks to click Jeff Okudah would have been a good pick. He had a good game, a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, a pass breakup, 4 solos, 2 assists. I thought Jeffrey Okudah was excellent on Saturday.
Oh, precise. Yeah, you're looking at as much as I hate to say it. It's one of these things where, when Jeffrey Okudah declares for the NFL draft after this season, he's one of those guys. I know that you sometimes have these schemes about what can we do to keep these guys in Columbus. So if you have one for Jeffrey Okudah, I'm certainly open to it. But yeah, he is certainly going to be the kind of guy that when he declares is going to be a projected high. And when I mean high, like first round NFL draft choice.
So I want to call attention to one particular play because I think this shows, you and I talked about Harrison Bryant last week. He had a big game, 6 catches, 79 yards, didn't get in the end zone, but he's clearly a big part of what they want to do, and you see the talent with him. You see that he can make a difference probably even at the NFL level. He'll be playing at the next level. And one play that really stood out to me was another punching bag favorite of Ohio State fans from last year. Jocelyn Wint was in coverage on him, and he went down the field, and Wint was right there step for step with him. The ball was thrown high. Harrison Bryant went up and got it. Jocelyn Wint actually got his hand up in between the body of the receiver and his hands and tried to force that ball out and could not do it. That's how strong Harrison Bryant's hands are and how talented he is.
Well, Jocelyn Wint, let's face it, he's the favorite whipping boy of the Ohio State fan base outside of Damon Arnett.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe, I think this new scheme is going to serve him well. But when I realize this is a completely different position and different season, but I'm sure you recall back in 2013 in the season opener when when they played against Buffalo, and Taylor Decker was making his first start at right tackle and was being abused repeatedly by a guy by the name of Khalil Mack. And everyone thought, oh my God, Taylor Decker's terrible. And it's like, why don't we give some credit to the opposition? As John Cooper used to say, the other team, they give out scholarships too. When it comes to getting back to present day, Harrison Bryant, as you said quite accurately, is going to be playing in the NFL. And Jocelyn Wint, no, he's not spectacular, but he's certainly playing better than he did last season. So let's, cut him some slack.
Well, that's why I wanted to call attention to that play. It was textbook coverage. The coverage was great. He had his arm exactly where it needed to be to rake that ball out, and he still couldn't do it. I mean, he did everything right on the play, but you tip your cap to Harrison Bryant because he made the play anyway. So, it was a good game for Ohio State. It wasn't great because I think a lot of people expected that dominance in the first quarter to continue and no adjustments to be made and all that stuff. But, when one team is making adjustments and the other is like, well, we got a big lead, there's no reason for us to do anything differently. It's going to look not as good the rest of the game. So 45-21, and that includes losing the turnover battle. And And Chip, some of it was just dumb luck. I mean, FAU was 5 for 5 getting on loose balls on Saturday. And
right. Well, we talked
got
about
got on both of Ohio State's fumbles. They got on 2 of their own fumbles and their own muffed punt. So, I mean, it could have been a much different day if Ohio State could have just fallen on a few of those loose balls.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about, all right, the fumble by J.K. Dobbins wasn't, I mean, those are unfortunate, but when you go back and you look at that replay, it's like, all right, the way that the helmet was, on that hit on Dobbins' arm to cause the fumble. We already talked about, how unfortunate it was with the lateral that Fields, when he was throwing to Garrett Wilson and Ruckert didn't, fall on the ball. I mean, those are just examples. And some of the things that you were just mentioning, I mean, there are so many different things where I think you talk about when you look at the film, all right, these are coaching opportunities for improvement from game 1 to game 2 and throughout the season.
Mm-hmm. So, overall, if you look at the way the game unfolded, Ohio State scored 4 touchdowns on their first 4 drives. Then they went punt, fumble, end of half. Third quarter, they went punt, touchdown, field goal to start. They went punt, touchdown, and then the fourth quarter, touchdown, field goal, and end of half. So after the interception by Proctor. So, they did have some struggles in the middle part of the game, but they started strong, they finished strong, and really some turnovers kind of undid them in that middle part of the game.
Yeah.
So
I mean, for first game, I'll take it. I've seen worse.
Yeah, exactly. So you and I talked about kind of everything, but just give me a couple things that stood out to you offensively. It could be a player, it could be a thing. We've already talked about the offensive line. I think both of us wanted to see how that held up. I think the offensive line did fine. Again, they weren't asked to do anything too incredibly difficult. I thought they opened up some holes in the run game. And I also think that there were opportunities there on, maybe some read plays, some read option plays that either were not options, like not actual options, or potentially Justin Fields misread them, where there were actually big holes that could have been utilized. There was a play I want to say it was in the second quarter, where there was an opening on the right that was just as open for Fields to run for a touchdown as the one in the first half, but he gave the ball.
Right. I mean, if you're asking me, like 3 big things that I would, regardless of whether we're talking offensively or defensively, I would say the biggest thing to me is the Ohio State defense. They eliminated the big plays that plagued them throughout the year. You know what I mean? Like that, the elimination of big plays by the opposition. I think that was a big contrast. I think you and I would both agree that the Ohio State running game is a work in progress. I mean, we talked about J.K. Dobbins. I think Master Teague, it was a welcome sight. Marcus Crowley, Demario McCall. But I want to see more, because you and I both know that when the weather starts to get more and more inclement, if you will, that when you need to run the ball, it's one of those things where, you have to be productive. So that's something that I think is going to be, as I said a moment ago, a work in progress. And let's just call it what it is when it comes to Justin Fields. I think his development is going to be tested, especially by Cincinnati as well as by the opposition, because you're talking about a guy who he played sparingly at Georgia. When he did play, it was usually in mop-up duty or in kind of special packages. So he's still he's very raw. So those are the things that I would say that Ohio State is certainly well positioned to be a contender in the Big Ten. But long way to go. And you and I both know that this season flies by rapidly. So hopefully the coaching staff, they do anything and everything they can within their capacity to make Ohio State a force within the Big Ten as it gets closer and closer to conference play.
I would say overall there were some things that I was pleased with. Of course, not giving up the big plays, not seeing the secondary taking bad angles, the team playing much quicker on defense, much quicker, much faster, being able to shed blockers and get to the quarterback. All of that was good stuff. You didn't see Damon Arnett getting torched. You didn't see, you really didn't see too many problems in the secondary. The zone was I think, pretty effective, and there were a couple of opportunities where balls were really close to being intercepted. And I think that this team will force more turnovers as the season goes on, as they get more used to playing at game speed and with each other and build that chemistry up in the secondary. And also think that they played pretty basic throughout the game. So I think that there'll be opportunities where, the defensive line will either stunt or have a blitz going on, and that's going to help that secondary out a little bit as the quarterback doesn't have quite as much time. And I think that they'll mix some coverages up where they show one thing and then give them something else. So I think there's a lot to like about the defensive situation. Mm-hmm. I think both of us, think we need to see more out of JK, but I think that the building blocks are there, and they look like that offensive line looks like it will get better and better as they play more together. So I was happy about that. Justin Fields did everything I really wanted him to do. He avoided the big mistake. He made big plays. So no problems on that front. So I think we saw a lot of the things we wanted to see on Saturday. And now we just have to see if the Buckeyes can build on that. Now, some of the things we also saw were a little disappointing. I think that it wasn't anything that the Buckeyes could have anything to do with. There was... I don't like to talk too much about the officiating when I don't have to, but I thought for certain DeMario McCall sustained a late hit in that game. I thought that Justin Fields was targeted with a helmet to his chest on a play where he had given himself up sliding. And even if you think that maybe he didn't slide early enough, you still can't hit him helmet first. So I thought that was disappointing that didn't get called, and I also thought it was disappointing that forward progress was given on the broken tackle where the guy ended up getting tackled in the end zone, because if he somehow escapes that and runs for a touchdown, do you think it's still going to be called forward progress?
Good point.
The whistle didn't blow. So how was that supposed to be, forward progress? Because generally if it's forward progress, you blow the whistle.
Yeah,
you don't just wait to see if he gets tackled in the end zone and then say, forward progress. I don't know, but those are things that you can't really control, and college refs. What are you going to do?
Right.
All right, Chip. So, I think, is there anything else that we need to talk about between the Buckeyes and Owls? Anything else that is on your mind?
Hey, 1-0 with the opportunity to be 2-0. That's to me. I think we're ready to move forward.
All right, so now let's turn our attention toward this Saturday as the Cincinnati Bearcats come to town. They have won their opener. They are 1-0 after defeating UCLA, and that was a game that I watched quite a bit of. And I thought that Cincinnati's defense looked pretty good. I thought their offense actually looked pretty good. I think that UCLA shot themselves in the foot a lot in that game, though. So there were plays there to be made, and we will see. But I think that we're going to see a lot of blitzing, a lot of, trickery on defense from Cincinnati, and I think they're going to pull out all the stops on Saturday. How do you see? Did you watch the Bearcats opener, and what do you think of that team?
Oh, I did, absolutely. I mean, that's the great thing about college football opening weekend. Taking advantage of the Thursday through Monday avenues of seeing as much college football as possible. But yeah, I mean, I certainly would have watched that game even if Cincinnati wasn't the second game on Ohio State's schedule. But I completely agree with you. I think defensively, Cincinnati is going to be a much tougher opponent than Florida Atlantic ever was in any capacity. And offensively, I think they are also going to give the Buckeyes enough to make it a little more challenging. I think they are still predominantly a run-oriented team, as you would expect from a disciple of both Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer and Luke Fickell. But I was impressed with Desmond Ridder. I think that's the quarterback for Cincinnati. I mean, he showed, kind of that efficiency aspect that we were complimenting Justin Fields with earlier. As he was, he completed, I want to say like 60 something. I want to say like 69% of his passes. I mean, he was really good.
Yeah, you're right on. He was 18 of 26, 69.2%, 242 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. So a really good first game for the sophomore.
And he also, I mean, in terms of, I'm sure you saw it, that Cincinnati was often rolling him out, on quarterback waggle plays where he had the option to throw and or run. So that's something that the Ohio State linebackers will certainly need to account for, to neutralize. I certainly am concerned about, and I know that he seemed banged up near the end of the game. Michael Warren II, who was the Mr. Football award winner back in 2016, and did not get a scholarship offer from Ohio State. And that's always something. I need you to kind of talk me off the ledge here. That's always something that whenever Ohio State's playing an in-state school, I don't care that I know that Cincinnati is not in the MAC, but any in-state school, I'm always leery of when you have a team or a roster that's comprised of a lot of Ohio players who may justifiably feel slighted that Ohio State did not offer them a scholarship. I think that just adds to that incentive to put their best foot forward against the Buckeyes.
All right, let me try to talk you off the ledge, Chip. Michael Warren, I agree. When he got hurt, I that didn't look good, but he ended up coming back in the game, which surprised me because he did look like he was going to be done for the night. 26 carries, 92 yards. That's only a 3.5-yard average, 1 touchdown. So I think Ohio State's defense is much better than UCLA's, but of course Cincinnati will get better between week 1 and week 2. Ohio State should get better between week 1 and week 2. I'm hopeful that no team can run between the tackles on this Buckeye defense. It's built in a way that we saw. We saw a lot of this from Michigan's defense last year in the build up to the Ohio State game. We didn't see it in the Ohio State game. They're pretty stout through the middle if you try to run the ball. And I think Ohio State will be that as well. And I think what really helps Ohio State is that you also have trouble getting outside on them, as we saw FAU having issues because of the speed in the secondary, the speed, not only in the secondary, but the defensive ends, the linebackers flowing to the ball. It's just very difficult to run on this Buckeye team, I think. And I'm not too worried about Michael Warren. If assuming he's healthy enough to play, he will be a focal point of having to stop. And I thought Cincinnati's offensive line did a pretty good job, but I really like Ohio State's defensive line depth. I like the fact that they can rotate guys and stay fresh and maybe wear that offensive line down over the course of a game.
Well, I agree with you. I think that Ohio State, the speed and the depth, especially in the interior, I think is certainly going to be, something that the Bearcats did not see against UCLA. And I also agree with what you said earlier that the Bruins self-destructed numerous times. It was mind-boggling to watch some of those turnovers that UCLA self-inflicted. But like I think Fickell freely admitted in an article that I read prior to the game against UCLA on Yahoo Sports that he looks at it like I get to play against my big brother, and there's nobody that I would want to beat more than my big brother. His love of Ohio State is not in question. I think he is going to get or should get, and this is kind of my scolding tone, to Ohio State fans who do otherwise, should get a warm welcome. Like the mere fact that he's coaching for the opposing team should not negate the fact that you're talking about a guy who started 50 consecutive games at nose guard, played with a torn pectoral muscle in the 1997 Rose Bowl, was an assistant coach. And, oh, by the way, he kind of, had to fall on the sword during the infamous 2011 season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
he had to step in and do a difficult thing and replace Jim Tressel in a year that you kind of knew was going to be a little bit of a lost year with a lot of starters being suspended for the first part of that season and all of that. Yeah.
So, I mean, when it comes to, Luke Fickell, I look at him and I think, all right, he definitely is coming in. I know Cincinnati has a lot to play for within the American Athletic Conference in terms of, winning that. But let's not deny this is the Super Bowl for the Cincinnati Bearcats. Like nothing would mean more to them than to come up to Ohio Stadium and defeat Ohio State in Ohio Stadium for the first time ever in this series. I mean, this will be the 17th time that they've played. Ohio State has won 14. The last time Cincinnati won was 1897. It was a 24-0 shutout in Cincinnati. Cincinnati has never defeated Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. The last time Ohio State lost to an in-state team, I think, was like 1921 to Oberlin. So, this is, and you and I both know. We're not that old. I don't remember the 1921 loss to Oberlin, but we certainly remember the 2002 close call, against Cincinnati down in Paul Brown Stadium. So that's why I'm kind of on the ledge. I think Ohio State wins, but it's going to be a tough one.
All right. And I was in Ohio Stadium the last time the teams played just a few years back, and that was a little bit of a pain in the neck game. The Bearcats were able to make some big plays on offense. They had a very good offense that year. They're built a little bit differently now. I'm feeling okay about this game. I think Ohio State will be fine as long as they take better care of the football than they did in Week 1. UCLA was terrible on offense, and they stayed in that game pretty much till the end. They lose 24-14, I believe, was the final score. Dorian Thompson-Robinson for UCLA was awful. He was 8 of 26. That's a 30% completion rating. I don't think a lot of that I think some of that had to do with Cincinnati's defense, but I think a lot of it had to do with DTR. And some of it had to do with DTR's offensive line, and some of it had to do with his receivers, but mostly DTR looked awful, because even when he had guys open, he didn't get them the ball. He threw 2 picks, just not a great night for him, and I thought that he really didn't do his team any favors. So, Ohio State's going to have to, again, first and foremost, shut down Michael Warren. They're going to have to be honest on the edges and watch for that rollout that you were speaking about, because Desmond Ridder is mobile. He'll get outside and they're going to move him around and try to avoid that Ohio State pass rush. So Ohio State's going to have to be smart and pick their spots about when to bring people. If you bring a double A gap blitz and the guy rolls out, that's not going to be very effective defense. So going to have to watch what they do and how they do it and where they do it and when they do it. So hopefully they'll find some things that they like in the game film and be able to handle Desmond Ridder, who is a big part. If Cincinnati's going to come close to pulling the upset, Desmond Ridder's going to have a big night.
I completely agree. I think Desmond Ridder will be the key. I look for both teams to, let's face it, I think I look for both teams to stack the line, and kind of dare the other to make big plays through the air.
Mm-hmm. Now, they have some tight ends in Cincinnati, and of course Ohio State has always struggled to really defend the tight end, so we'll have to see how well they can bottle up Josiah Dugara, who had 4 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown last week. But that maybe that'll be offset by Jeremy Ruckert having another big game.
That's what I'm anticipating.
So really, a lot of this will come down to, I think, special teams at field position and ball security. I think that Ohio State will be okay if it just has an average night in those areas.
Yeah, it might even kind of resemble a little bit of trestle ball.
It could.
When it comes down to like field position and ball security, it might, Jim Tressel might be smiling approvingly from his presidential suite up in Youngstown State.
Mm-hmm. Now, the thing that you'll want to watch, obviously, is, Ohio State. If Justin Fields is going to be effective, Ohio State cannot be afraid that he'll get hurt, because if they can't just use him as a decoy in the run game. He has to be a legitimate threat to run the football. If he's not, it doesn't help him, and it certainly doesn't help J.K. Dobbins.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at some point you have to just kind of, I don't want to say throw caution to the wind, but you have to let him play his game. And, you can't play this game scared. If you go into it with the idea that, you might get hurt, you and I have both been around long enough to know that that's usually when somebody does get hurt, is when you play to avoid that. Right.
I mean, if you are that worried about him being hurt, then you have to make him a pocket passer. You can't just you can't fake the read option, because if it's not there, then he doesn't have that option to actually give or keep. It's already predetermined, and that's not, as we've seen, that's not very successful. And if you're going to want the other team to think that there's a threat, then you have to actually use that threat. Now, they did early on against Florida Atlantic, and then they went completely away from it once he had the big touchdown.
And let's face it, no disrespect to Justin Fields, being a pocket passer is not really his game.
Right.
It would be kind of, all right, we saw it last year with Dwayne Haskins, asking him to run the zone read. You could see how uncomfortable he was with it, because that wasn't a natural part of his game.
Mm-hmm.
So by negating the zone read element from Justin Fields, you're essentially doing the opposite of what you did to Dwayne Haskins last year. You have to incorporate that into the offense. Now, how frequently you do that, that's, you know what I mean? That's where it comes back to, okay, like I said, like that high wire balancing act. But you need to incorporate that into the game if you want your offense to flow and develop in the manner that it's capable of progressing throughout the season.
Right. I mean, I'm of the opinion that you need to let Justin Fields be Justin Fields and use him the way that you wanted to use him. When you got him to come to Ohio State, because that's why you got him to come to Ohio State, to do certain things. If you're not going to do those things and you're going to be afraid he's going to get hurt, then he's not going to be as effective, and you may as well have just kept Matthew Baldwin.
Yeah, who, by the way, is now eligible for Texas Christian. So.
That's good. But yeah, the thing is they just have to let Justin Fields do his thing. If he gets hurt, well, that sucks, and you have to go to plan B, and maybe you're going to have to grind out some stuff with Chugs until Gunnar Hoke is ready. But, I mean, that's the reality of the quarterback position not being deep. And you can't just hide your guy because you don't want him to get hurt, because it's not going to be effective, and the other team is going to be able to defend you so much easier when they know certain things are off the table.
Yeah, and Cincinnati, they're ready. I would be immensely surprised if Luke Fickell and Marcus Freeman do not sell out against the run early on, until Ohio State shows that they are capable of, hitting some passes, which kind of gets them to back off, and then I think that zone read will start to click if they run it.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It's going to be interesting to see exactly how Ohio State approaches the offensive side of the football this Saturday. So, with that said, why, Chip, don't we get to our score predictions and our picks to click? Which do you want to do first?
Why don't we do score predictions?
All right, so we will predict our final score. What do you think is going to happen on Saturday between the Cincinnati Bearcats and the Ohio State Buckeyes?
I think it's going to be a slugfest for most of the game. I really do. I think it's going to be, as I said, I think kind of a defensive chess match. Ohio State has kind of, as I said, a work in progress with their running game with J.K. Dobbins. We've just been talking about Justin Fields and not running the zone read, or not running it enough effectively. I think Fickle and Freeman, they're going to do everything they can to sell out against the run. I think Ohio State's going to do likewise. So I think it's going to be a slugfest. I think in the fourth quarter, though, is where Ohio State's superior athletic talent, especially along the receiving options, along the defensive line, linebacker, I think like the speed, the depth, that's going to start to play more of a part. So I look at it, I see Ohio State pulling ahead in the fourth quarter. I'm going to go Ohio State 31, Cincinnati 21.
31-21. All right. Yeah, I'm with you in that I think that this is going to be one of those games that's a pain in the neck for three quarters, and maybe Ohio State starts to wear them down in the fourth quarter, maybe start seeing some runs work that didn't work in the first half kind of thing. Carries that went for 2 yards in the first quarter may end up going for 5 or 6 in the fourth, and ones that went for 5 in the first quarter may end up getting 12, 15 yards. So I think you're right there. I'm really anxious to see how Ohio State cleans up the blitz pickups and the stunt pickups and the kinds of things that allowed FAU to not really climb back in the game, but to sort of stop the bleeding last Saturday. How are they going to attack those and address those issues this week? What do they let Justin Fields do offensively? Can those receivers continue to get open and create mismatches and create lots of space downfield? I think that Ohio State wins this 34-20.
Okay. I like it.
I kind of think FAU has a better offense than Cincinnati, but I don't think they're at the same level overall as a team as Cincinnati. But I mean, I like what Lane Kiffin has sort of done. He's good at recognizing when things are not working and how to sort of work around those things and to get scheme advantages and mismatches and that kind of thing. I don't know that Cincinnati's offense is on that level. They certainly have as talented or more talented players at several positions. But Fickle's a little closer to Tresselball, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I'm going to say 34-20, and we'll see how it stacks up. So I don't remember if you started on offense or defense last week. I think you started on offense, and then I also picked J.K. Dobbins. So why don't we start with defense this week? Who is your defensive pick to click?
I'm gonna, I'm gonna stick with Brendan White. I know that, he did not necessarily have a great game, but he had a good game, and I like what I saw of the new defensive scheme. So I'm gonna stick with Brendan White.
Okay, I am going to go with. I don't want us both to stick with who we had last week, but I really do like the way Malik Harrison looks this year. I will go with Jordan Fuller.
Okay.
I think Jordan Fuller is going to have a big game, both in the passing game and also in the run game. I think he's a very good run support safety. I expect some big things. I think that Cincinnati will try to attack on the edges. I don't think that they want to go right at the Buckeyes, so I think that's going to force Jordan Fuller into making some plays.
I like it.
That's where I'm at. All right, offensively, I will go first, and I will say I liked the way that Jeremy Ruckert looked this week, and I think Ohio State stays with that, and I'm going to go with Jeremy Ruckert.
I agree with you. I don't want to. I'm not just saying that just because of the fact that it's a popular opinion. I like the mismatch that he presents to the opposition. The fact that you better have if you're gonna cover him, you better have a really good coverage, safety like most teams, don't have the luxury of that. They don't have, a good coverage linebacker for certain that can stay with him. So I agree with you. Jeremy Ruckert is definitely my pick. I don't anticipate. I think we would be overly presumptuous that he's certainly going to equal his reception and touchdown quotas, based on what we saw in game one. But I think he's going to be one of those guys that he's going to come up with some clutch plays that will sustain drives. And he's going to be one of those factors that I mentioned a few moments ago that is going to help Ohio State get their running game going by being a factor in the passing game.
Mm-hmm. I just think that Mike Yurcich also likes to use the tight end. I think that Kevin Wilson likes to use the tight end. And I think Ryan Day likes to use the tight end a lot more than Urban Meyer did.
Yeah, well, I remember when Urban Meyer was hired, everyone anticipated Jake Stoneburner having this. Maybe even Jake Stoneburner anticipated having a big year, because based on Urban Meyer's reputation at Florida. Mm-hmm. And it never really came to pass. And I think that Ryan Day is just more of I'm gonna play with the personnel I have and put them in positions to succeed. And when you look at Jeremy Ruckert, as well as the fact that you've got with Luke Farrell and Jake Hausman, you've got some very capable blocking tight ends. So it just kind of creates a lot of opportunities, and I think Ruckert's going to be the beneficiary of that this coming season.
I think the other thing it does too, and you look at it, as much as Ohio State used two tight end sets, that even when they're split out wide or used as an H and that kind of thing, these tight ends, what they do for you is they give you more beef in the blocking game, and then you're not reliant on Benjamin Victor, who hasn't been a great blocker throughout his career. Austin Mack, not the biggest guy. I think you're certainly KJ Hill is not the. He's known a lot more for his receiving than he is for his blocking. So I think it gives you guys on the field that can help you in other ways. They can be formidable in the passing game, but they can also really help your run game.
Yeah, and when we talk about the running game, I think that's going to be the question throughout the entire. I shouldn't say the entire. Throughout the early part of the season, is the Ohio State running game struggled throughout 2018. It was very inconsistent. We would both agree that, the J.K. Dobbins had an okay game, but, we were both expecting more. I think the personnel that they have at tight end is going to help develop that running game throughout 2019.
Mm-hmm. I would have to go back and look at the running plays more carefully because I wasn't really charting it. But to me, it looked like against FAU, it looked like Ohio State ran about 4 or 5 different run plays, and that was it. It looked like they didn't really get too complex in their run game.
No, they did not. And again, you don't want to show everything in game one.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see how that looks, when they open up certainly you can't open the playbook all the way up. This is the first year of the Ryan Day era. You got a new offensive coordinator in. You got a new starting quarterback. You can't just throw everything in that you want to. So it's going to come together gradually, but it'll be nice to see when that offense is fully weaponized.
Yes. I certainly think we're just kind of seeing not even the tip of the iceberg. I think we're just seeing kind of the iceberg on the horizon. How's that?
Mm-hmm. You got any crazy bold predictions for the weekend? Do you think we're going to see a special teams touchdown, a defensive touchdown? You got any crazy thoughts of that way?
I guess I think I'm looking more to the exploits of Drew Chrisman, like in the special teams coverage unit, pinning Cincinnati deep. How's that? I don't know how crazy that is, but maybe that'll be something that we'll see that we didn't necessarily see in week one.
I saw some things that I liked. I wanted to bring up the special teams. I kind of forgot to when we were talking about the game itself, but a couple things I liked about it. Ohio State came close to blocking a couple of kicks. I'd say that Demario McCall came very close to breaking a couple of long kickoff returns. So I think I think we might see a little bit more effectiveness out of the return game this year. Just based on one game, it's kind of hard to say that, but I liked what I saw, and I typically, the last couple of years in the return game, have not liked what I've seen all that much. And, Drew Chrisman, I think, had a tough start to the game. His first one was a short punt that was actually returnable, and I think he had another short returnable one that didn't get pinned in where you normally would pin him in. But for the game, he actually ended up with decent statistics, so he recovered from that, and that's nice to see because he is and can be such a weapon.
Yeah, and as we both know that the punt is the most important play in football, but in all seriousness, that field position, when you're going into a game against Luke Fickell, who is a Jim Tressel disciple, I mean, you want to take advantage of every opportunity you can to pin the opposition deep. So that's kind of, if I had to predict, I think Ohio State might be able to do that better than they did in Week 1 against Florida Atlantic.
All right, Chip, anything else you want to talk about? You want to talk about the Michigan game? Did you see Michigan?
I watched most of it, and then I freely admit I woke up very early. I should say very early. I woke up early on Saturday morning because my sons were in a cross-country meet that required me waking up at 6:30 in the morning, to get ready and be there to help kind of, I don't want to say chaperone, but help with the meet. So like when it got to be around 10:30, 11 o'clock on Saturday night, I freely admit I petered out. So I didn't watch but I mean, they looked okay. I don't want to give them too much praise. It's not because they're Michigan and anything like that. I thought, like they had some sputtering moments too. Like if we're gonna be critical of Ohio State, let's apply the same discerning lens to the Wolverines. I think they have a tougher test this weekend against Army, with that triple option.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, by and large, I always take advantage. Like I watched a lot of we already talked about the Cincinnati UCLA game. Friday night, I was trying to watch as much of the Michigan State Tulsa game because they looked impressive to me, especially defensively. And then some of the other games, like you said, like Michigan, I was flipping back and forth between Iowa and Miami of Ohio. So yeah, I watched a lot of football. I mean, kind of had my eye on the Notre Dame Louisville game as we speak. So, it's one of the great things about the opening week, my man.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And, I got to say, if Michigan fans, I'm not sure how good they feel about their 40-21 win over Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee kind of hung around and was kind of aggravating to them for a while, and they did get some turnovers. They did get some long, a couple long pass completions for touchdowns. There was some guys that were kind of wide open a couple of times for Shea Patterson, but I think there were some, I will say, cause for concern to Wolverines fans in that game, especially with regard to the run game a little bit, and maybe not looking as dominant as they should. But then again, they come into this week against Army, and Army did not look great against Rice.
No, they did not. So we'll see. I mean, I think the big first. I mean, Ohio State's getting a test against Cincinnati. Michigan's getting maybe a different kind of test against Army. But I think they're going to have a real big test in a few weeks when they play Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. That game does not look nearly as, like, oh, okay, well, they're going to Wisconsin. I think that game, we'll see how Wisconsin progresses. But, yeah, I certainly think that Ohio State fans, just kind of keep your eyes on the road for yourself and not worry about what anyone else is doing. Put it that way.
Yeah, no, I will say that Wisconsin looked impressive. Michigan State looked impressive. I have no idea how good their opposition is going to end up being this year. That being Tulsa for Michigan State and South Florida for Wisconsin. I did get to see a good chunk of Northwestern and Stanford, and Northwestern didn't look very good. Nebraska had a bit of a struggle in their first game. So,
yes.
And then, Maryland put a bunch of points up. So it's too early to really make any assumptions about the way that the teams are going to end up this year. I think in the past we've seen Michigan State just absolutely stumble out of the gate and then become very, very good toward the middle of the season. So I don't know what that means that they looked good on week one.
Right. And I've always been a proponent that, there should be no kind of rankings or polls until after at least like 5 weeks into the season, because you really don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all based on what you said, like a subjective analysis, like, who's returning and where the game,
Right.
I kind of mentioned that last week, like where are we playing this and when are we playing them? And, and it's like, okay, best educated guess. And let's face it, you really don't know what you have until the teams are on the field.
Right. And about week 5, most teams have at least played a couple of conference games, so you can gain some kind of insight there, against competition that's at their level, because it's really hard to know at this point, what is FAU going to do this year? What is Middle Tennessee going to do this year? What's Tulsa going to do? South Florida? We don't know if those are good teams or not. So we really don't know how to view the various results at the end of the day that the Big Ten had in these games. So, but it'll be interesting. Nebraska looked like, we thought coming in, Nebraska's going to have an awesome offense. Their defense is suspect. And they actually won the game because of defense, and didn't look that impressive on offense. So it's as much as we thought, kind of expected. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the teams sort of unfold over the course of the next few weeks.
I agree.
All right, Chip. Well, that will do it for this week. We'll come back next week and do it all again. We'll talk about Cincinnati at Ohio State. We'll prepare for Ohio State's first road trip to Indiana. Both of these next 2 games are at noon. We don't yet have a start time for Miami at Ohio State on the 21st or Ohio State at Nebraska on the 28th. I think both you and I would assume that the Huskers will want that to be a night game so they can be all crazy and loud and all that good stuff. And then we know that Ohio State will play a night game on October 5th against Michigan State.
Yeah, and we should have, I'm not saying definitively, but I think it's usually like a 10-day window that most of the time game kickoffs are set. So it's entirely possible that next week when we are recording for the Indiana podcast that we might have an idea as to when the Ohio State-Miami of Ohio game will kick off on September 21st.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that's probably a noon kickoff, but we'll see.
We'll see. I just know that Michigan-Wisconsin's also at noon, so I'm going to go with 3:30. That's my early. We know for sure it's on the Big Ten Network. Mm-hmm. So my prediction is 3:30, but you might be right.
All right, that'll do it. We'll be back next week to do this all over again, see how our picks to click did, see how our predictions panned out. We're off to a good start, and that's kind of scary for me because usually my predictions are terrible. But we'll see. This is going to be a fun one. This is one of the ones that was certainly from the non-conference teams. This is the one you circle on the schedule when you compared to Miami and FAU, and really up until that Nebraska game, this is the toughest game.
Easily.
So,
like I said, this is kind of a gut check, character building game. I think Ohio State's going to have a pretty good idea as to kind of where they are, because I think Cincinnati would probably rank among, I don't want to say the better teams in the Big Ten, but definitely a competitive team in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm. All right, Chip. We'll sign off for this week. We'll come back and do it again with Silver Bullets again next week. If you would like to ask us a question and have us answer it on the podcast, please hit us up. Chip, let them know where they can find you on Twitter.
I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnick. Last name is spelled Minnich. And like Michael, I'm also a contributor to the Hayes and Cannon section on the Ozone. And I also am a contributor to Athlon Sports.
All right. You can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. You can hit us up with hashtag SBP Mailbag. That's Silver Bullets Podcast Mailbag, SBP Mailbag. And ask us anything you want to know, and we'll be happy to answer it on the next show. You can find me on the ozone.net in the Hayes and Cannon section. I am the Grumpy Old Buckeye. You can go read my column for the FAU opener on the site right now, and we hope you do. But we'll come back next week. We'll talk about Cincinnati. We'll get ready for Indiana. And until then, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.